Hello?
The first thing I remember about Vandal is how he was hanging upside down in his cage, calling out as loudly as he could. He kept squawking as if he desperately wanted someone to notice him. Then, when I stepped closer, he turned his head, looked directly into my eyes, and greeted me.
Hello?
Hello. Hi, baby.
I had come to the shelter that day for a completely different reason. My mother had passed away that January, and I was going through an incredibly painful time. Being around birds was one of the few things that could still bring me even a little happiness, so I told my husband I needed to go to the shelter and spend some time with them. He knew how much animals meant to me and understood. That's where I met Vandal.
Let's do woo.
Huh?
Woo! Woo!
The shelter owner kept trying to convince me that I shouldn't choose him. He thought I didn't need a bird like Vandal and even questioned my judgment for being so drawn to him. But the more I looked at Vandal, the more certain I felt that I was supposed to meet him.
Is it good? It's good, huh? Good boy. Hi.
When he looked at me and said hello,
Hello?
something about that moment stayed with me. I've always believed that animals have a way of choosing their people rather than the other way around. And standing there with Vandal, I had this strange feeling that maybe he needed me just as much as I needed him. It took 6 visits to the shelter before I finally brought him home. Vandal was about 7 years old, and most of his life had been spent in a cage. I already had 3 children, so our home was far from quiet, and I wasn't sure how another family member would fit into everything. Somehow, Vandal figured it out almost immediately.
You want to touch it again? Here, touch it. Wow. Touch it. Touch it.
My husband wasn't especially interested in having another pet at first, but he was willing to accept it because he knew how much bringing Vandal home meant to me. That changed pretty quickly once Vandal started calling him Papa. Hearing that from him felt surprisingly sweet, almost like hearing a baby say it for the first time. These days, whenever my husband leaves for work in the morning, Vandal will keep calling out for Papa for about 20 minutes.
Hi.
Of course, Vandal isn't always quite so polite. He has picked up some words that aren't exactly appropriate, and when the kids get too noisy, he'll sometimes yell at them in a way that makes me blush. I suspect some of that language may have come from his previous owner. Every now and then, he also has a full tantrum, throwing his food dish across the room before following it with a series of angry squawks.
What are you doing? Nobody's doing laundry.
We're trying to replace those habits with kinder words. He's learned simple greetings, and now he can even whisper them. Hearing him softly say, "Hello, baby," is one of those little things that can make the whole room feel lighter.
Hello?
Hi.
Hi.
He has plenty of other quirks too. Vandal absolutely hates shoes in the house. If someone walks in wearing them, he'll chase after their feet and nip at their boots. At times, he seems less like a parrot and more like a tiny guard dog.
Hello?
Hello.
He's especially protective of me. When I'm asleep, he often stays near the bedroom door, as though he's keeping an eye on things. And when I'm not feeling well, he seems to notice right away. He'll gently rest his head on my knee, look up at me, and quietly say, "Hello, baby." Those moments mean more to me than I can really explain.
Hi, baby. I love you.
Parrots need a tremendous amount of care and attention, and they can become deeply attached to the people who look after them. When they're abandoned, the loss of that bond can affect them terribly. Some stop eating, pull out their own feathers, or become sick. That's why I still think about all the birds waiting in shelters. Knowing that so many of them have already experienced being left behind is something I find very difficult. I hope I get to live a long life and care for Vandal for as many years as possible. And when the time eventually comes that I can no longer do that, I hope my daughter will take him in and make sure he always has a loving home.
Hi.
When I first went to the shelter, I was simply looking for some comfort after losing my mother. I never expected that visit would lead me to Vandal, or that a 7-year-old parrot would eventually become such an important part of our family.
Hi. Hi. I love you. I just love you.
Vandal needed a home, and I was able to give him one. But somewhere along the way, he gave me something too. He became a small, funny, sometimes difficult, and incredibly loving part of our everyday lives. Now, when I look at him, I don't just see the bird I brought home from the shelter. I see a part of our family,